criticized for doing my job too well. Our company had a big problem with people not taking our mandatory online training seriously. Even though the higher-ups try to stress how important it is, people will usually flip through a 4-hour online training class in 10 minutes. My boss knows that I'm an amateur game designer in my free time, so he asked if I could do something to make the training modules funner. So I spent a little while turning the training into a fun little flash game. It's no Red Dead 2, but I'm pretty proud of how it turned out. For added fun, I created a leaderboard to keep track of high scores in the company. The high scores are a combination of fun little gameplay and being able to answer training questions. The training module ended up being extremely popular. People are spending so much time playing the game and trying to get on the leaderboard. Now the 4-hour training is taking on average 3 days for people to complete. Considering how mundane most of their jobs are, I don't blame them. Also, a lot of people take the training multiple times. From the logs, I can see that one person spent 13 business days, 8 hours per day, doing the training. My boss called me into his office today and chewed me out over writing something too fun. He said that upper management is really mad at this decline in productivity in the company, and that it's my fault. I left his office so freaking mad that I had to take a walk outside to cool down. I feel like I'm being criticized for doing my assigned task too well. But am I being unfair here? How can I patch things up without admitting any sort of fault? As a side note, the average test score from this training module is now 96%, up from the previous year of 68%.
You did exactly what was instructed, and took scores from barely passing to mastery. Emphasize that. If your boss won't bend, offer to take the game down. Meanwhile, you may want to update your resume. Taking scores from 68% to 96% is something that gives you huge bragging rights. I would also suggest seriously thinking about making educational games and/or trainers a direction you can take your career path. This is not something you should be scolded over or feel bad about. This is an amazing achievement. If your current employer doesn't appreciate you for this, others certainly will. This is a management issue. What happened with your game is a phenomenon called gone horribly right. There was no way to foresee the wild popularity and viral nature of your game, and you should accept no responsibility for it. Counter any management pushback with suggestions that a lockout be placed after a time limit with a maximum of X hours, and any access beyond that require a grant of access from a manager. Again, this is not something you did wrong, but something that management failed to limit. Special thanks to Caffeine Addiction and Jaywenting for their useful comments.
While it's not immediately your fault that people are spending too much time on the game, as the developer, you could help the situation. Turn off the scoreboard server, disable the game entirely for now. Go to your boss and show the increased test scores to show what benefit it has brought. Work with them to create a middle ground where employees are still engaged but don't spend unnecessary amounts of time goofing off.
I don't think you've correctly identified the problem. You weren't too good at your job, you simply performed a task without specific requirements. There were no guardrails. I don't think this is inherently your fault, but there are definitely steps you can take to avoid this. Focusing on your successes and trying to pass this off as something to brag about doesn't seem appropriate. Your boss has a legitimate complaint that is ignored by that approach. Yes, you raised scores, but you also caused efficiency to drop terribly. Employees are spending time playing your training game instead of doing their real jobs. Perhaps this isn't your fault, but it's certainly a legitimate complaint for your employer to have. Where does that leave us? That's pretty clear. This is a classic case of poorly specified goals. The terms of your work weren't detailed enough for you to be successful. Did your boss specifically ask you to make a game that people would only play for 4 hours, instead of stretching it to 3 days? Probably not. So, although he is legitimately angry, it's not because of deliberate action on your part. Others are focusing on steps you can take now to help rectify the problem that already exists, but there are clearly also steps you can take preemptively in the future to keep this from happening again. When your boss has tasks like this, ask guiding questions to help frame out quantitative ways you can ensure your work product is appropriate. In this case, it seems like the obvious question could have been:
First, you definitely did not do your job too well. Oh, sure, the training scores are up. But productivity is down so much that upper management got involved. That's not a success story, or a project that was simply done too well. Let's say you could go back in time, make 3 tweaks to your game that would have made it even more enjoyable. Do you think that would have made the project even better? No, obviously no. Second, if you're going to ever move up the ranks in development, you have to take ownership. Stop blaming a boss, or blaming co-workers playing the game instead of doing their job. Take ownership of the projects you do and the results those projects achieve. Your project failed, not because it wasn't fun, but because it killed productivity in the office. Instead of admitting to that, and figuring out ways to either fix the situation or prevent something like that from happening again, you're too worried about blaming the boss. Heck, at the end of your question you say, how can I patch things up without admitting any sort of fault? Which is the exact wrong attitude.
What would you answer to this question? Please write under this video.